Do I really need to read the whole book before I begin running the adventure? What's actually going on when the first session starts? Is there something I should change before starting the first session? And what do I need to be aware of so I can foreshadow it early? In this video, I will go over some of the most important things the DM, that's you, should know before you begin running Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. So without further ado, let's get into it. A question I often see DMs running published adventures ask is, should I read through the whole book before I can start running the adventure? And that's a very good question and also a matter of personal preference. For me and for Rime of the Frostmaiden, I don't believe that you need to read the whole book before you can begin running the adventure. You will want to have an understanding of what the adventure is about. I briefly touched upon this in the first video in the series, and you'll also want to know the adventure's background in detail so you can relay it to the players before the adventure begins. And you may also want to be aware of some of the events, locations and NPCs that are coming up so you can foreshadow them to the players and their characters in the earlier parts of the adventure. Beyond that, actually reading through every single location and room in Chapter 2 Icewind Dale or the Caves of Hunger or Doom of Ithrin isn't necessarily going to help you run a better campaign to begin with. So unless you really enjoy reading adventure modules, in which case you should do it, it won't hurt you. What I suggest you do is instead read the introductory chapter as well as most of chapter 1, which is going to be the frame and the setting for the first handful of sessions at least. And then you can skim the later chapters or maybe read the introductory parts to each chapter so you have an understanding of where things are going. I'll also try to help by explaining the adventure's background in more detail in this video, as well as go over some of the things I would change about the adventure's background. I'll also touch upon some of the things that are coming up in the adventure that you may want to foreshadow early in the campaign. Okay, so let's go over the background for Rime of the Frostmaiden. The adventure is set in Icewind Dale, which is in the northern part of Faerun in the Forgotten Realms. It is focused around this cluster of frontier settlements called 10 towns. 10 towns have existed for a few hundred years and is inhabited by a few thousand people who eke out an existence in this very, very harsh environment. The people of 10 towns have had issues in the past with barbarian invasions as well as invasions by goblinoids led by an evil wizard more than a century ago, and it also often has to deal with infighting between the various towns as they fight and argue over the fishing rights to the knucklehead trout, which is the 10 towns' primary resource for food and income. So all in all, life in Icewind Dale is pretty hard. The last 2 years it has gotten even harder as an everlasting winter has enveloped Icewind Dale. This winter is caused by Auril the Frostmaiden, who is a deity of cold and darkness. Auril's story is that she had a falling out with some other evil deities and had to flee in her physical form, manifest on the material plane, to Icewind Dale, where she's begun casting the spell of darkness. She lives on the Isle of Solstice in the Sea of Moving Ice, which is also from where she flies out each night on a giant rock to cast her spell, which takes the form of northern lights across 10 towns. For their part, the people of 10 towns seem to be aware that this is Auril's doing. They've dubbed the effect Auril's everlasting rime, and they realize that Auril must be mad at them since she's casting the spell. This has also caused some of the towns or all of the towns to perform sacrifices, even human sacrifices, to Auril as they hope to content her and stop the everlasting rime. Auril is also represented by frost druids in 10 towns who harass the citizens of the towns by using awakened animals such as the plesiosaurus who inhabits the lake up by Bremen and makes it difficult for fishers to go out and fish from the lake. Taking advantage of this darkness, a Durgar named Xardorok has come to the surface and has established a fortress in the mountains south of 10 towns. From here, he directs his Durgar to gather Xardorok, which is a sort of magical black ice, which is scattered about Icewind Dale and 10 towns, so he can build a dragon out of Xardorok. His Durgar are running around various 10 towns, particularly the southern towns, and trying to gather as much Xardorok as they can. It is Xardorok's plan, which is inspired by the Lord of the Nine Hills, Asmodeus, taking the form of Deep Duerra, the Durgar's chief deity. His plan is to destroy 10 towns using this Xardorok dragon. In addition, we also have the Arcane Brotherhood. These are a cabal of wizards based out of Luskan, south of Icewind Dale, which has come to the Dale to find the lost city of Uthrin, which was a part of the Netherese Empire. The Netherese Empire goes back 1500 years and consisted of inverted mountain tops made into cities that flew across the Forgotten Realms and had dominion over most of Faerun, like an ancient Roman civilization. These cities fell from the skies, and the Arcane Brotherhood rightly believes that one of them is in Icewind Dale underneath the Wrecked Glacier. So they, 4 of the wizards have come to Icewind Dale to find the lost city of Uthrin. These 4 wizards are going about 10 towns, searching out various clues and also trying to prevent each other from finding the city. As mentioned, there's also some things I would change about the adventure's background. These are not required changes. I won't even assume that you've made them, so you can follow along with the video series even if you don't apply some or all of these changes. First off, I think we need to make Auril's motivation more clear. As written in the book, we don't really get a good sense for why she's doing what she's doing. Why does she want to envelop 10 towns in Icewind Dale in an eternal winter? I think we need to have a clear understanding of the main villain's motives so we can better communicate her to the players and so that we can understand her and know what she'll do in different situations. I think it makes sense that Auril is trying for 2 different things simultaneously, but you can choose either one or neither. That's up to you to decide. First, deities in the Forgotten Realms become more powerful as they gain more followers. So maybe Auril is causing or creating this everlasting rime so she can drive the people of 10 towns into worshipping her. That'll also help explain why the people of 10 towns have begun making sacrifices to Auril. Perhaps Auril's druids are going around 10 towns urging them to make sacrifices in order to stave off this everlasting rime. Second, we can also use the Arcane Brotherhood's quest for Uthrin to be a driving motivation for Auril. Perhaps she has learned that the Arcane Brotherhood has found out about Uthrin, which she has preserved underneath the Wrecked Glacier and counts among one of her most treasured possessions, and she wants to stop the wizards from finding Uthrin. So when she learned that a few years ago, she began enveloping Icewind Dale in this eternal winter, making it more difficult for the wizards to find Uthrin. She can also direct her agents, the Frost Druids, to hinder or stop and harm the wizards from the Arcane Brotherhood, further tying her together with this other faction and this other storyline, which is finding Uthrin. As said, you can use both of these motivations together, making it even more logical why she's doing what she's doing, or you can just choose either one or stick with a less clear motivation. In the end, the players may not learn the intricacies of why Auril is doing what she's doing, but you knowing them allows you to better roleplay Auril and interact with the players. Another thing I would change about the adventure's background is how Auril's everlasting rime works. As described in the book, Auril has to cast the spell each night to preserve this eternal winter, which is sort of a constant. What I would want to do instead is that Auril's everlasting rime has become gradually worse and is getting gradually worse, and that it is also permanent. So even if you allow the characters to encounter Auril in chapter 5 of the book and they manage to defeat her there or kill her rock, that won't immediately resolve the main quest of the adventure, which is ending Auril's everlasting rime. The issue here is that if the characters complete the adventure in chapter 5, then chapter 6 and 7 become sort of an afterthought and not really connected to the rest of the adventure. So by instead deciding that Auril's everlasting rime is gradually, it started out just getting a bit darker and a bit colder each day until it's now almost completely dark and incredibly cold all the time. That also explains why the people of Icewind Dale haven't wholesale just left Icewind Dale yet, but have chosen to stay even though things are getting worse. It'll also put sort of a time pressure on the characters as they will be more encouraged to do something about it before it gets too bad. Instead of you trying to relay that it is already so bad that they need to do something fast. Another thing I think we can improve about the adventure's background is how it's described that the people of 10 towns know that Auril is involved. And that is why they are all 10 towns are performing sacrifices to Auril. Instead, I would like Auril's involvement to be more of a mystery, or at least a guess. Maybe most of the people in 10 Towns, or some of the people in 10 Towns, believe that Auril is involved, but no one really knows. This makes it sort of a mystery who's behind this everlasting rime, what's going on. It's obviously magical, it's obviously not natural, but who's behind it and how can we stop them? This also makes it so that the characters can actually get involved with the main plot before meeting Valin and getting her quest in chapters 3 and 4. Because as they're written in the book, the characters will obviously know about the everlasting rime, but they won't have any way to interact with it before they discover or learn about Earthren. So by making it a mystery, nobody knows who's behind it, although a lot of people suspect that Auril is behind it. The characters can, throughout chapter 1 and 2, go around trying to discover Auril's involvement, and they'll do that by encountering her frost druids or speaking with people that know something. Another thing we can change about the adventure's background is Auril's involvement, as well as how she uses her agents. In the book, it's Auril herself who flies across Icewind Dale on the back of a rock, casting the spell of Everlasting Rime each night. This creates some issues, particularly that the characters can then encounter her in chapter 5 and effectively end the adventure 2 chapters too soon, and also it's never really explained to us why she's in her physical form, which is also something the players might not understand. What I want to do instead is replace her with an agent. In this example, it'll be a frost giant druid, but you can replace her with anything of your liking, which then takes her place on Isle of Solstice, and which the characters can encounter as they go to the island. When this agent dies or is defeated, we can also use that as a catalyst to summoning Auril, as the agent gives up its life to summon Auril to the material plane so she can go after the characters herself. As for Auril's other agents, the frost druids that are scattered about Icewind Dale, I want to make them more active and purposeful. They are the ones going around to the 10 towns, urging the people to make sacrifices to Auril so they can drive them to worshipping their deity. They are also more intertwined with the Duergar and the Arcane Brotherhood, as they are actively trying to hinder and harm the wizards from the Arcane Brotherhood, and they are collaborating with the Duergar and helping them find Xardorok so they can destroy 10 towns, and the Duergar are in turn helping them by providing them information about the wizards from the Arcane Brotherhood so the Druids can try to stop and destroy these wizards. This both ties the storylines together, and it also makes the Frost Druids a more intentional presence instead of being sort of a random afterthought in some of the towns as it is right now. We will of course go into more detail with how you can use these Frost Druids and how you can expand upon the relationship between the various factions as we delve deeper into the various chapters. The last thing I'll also touch upon is these sacrifices the towns are making. In the book, you have 3 towns that are making human sacrifices: Targos, Easthaven, and Bryn Shander, while the other towns are sacrificing either food or warmth and comfort. I believe that, especially if the towns are not completely certain that Auril is behind the everlasting rime, that it makes more sense that sacrifices are more sporadic and not as communal in most cases. This means that people may be individually sacrificing to Auril as they believe in her or believe that she can end the eternal winter, while other people scoff at this notion or don't believe in sacrificing to an evil deity. Likewise, we can then use the Frost Druids to be the ones that are going around 10 towns trying to convince people to make human sacrificing, further enhancing their misery and driving them towards worshipping Auril the Frostmaiden. As an extension of that, I don't think it makes sense that Bryn Shander and Easthaven are cities that are performing the human sacrifices, as these are the more civilized cities and that they are also led by good leaders, while other towns such as Dugan's Hole and Goodmead and Targos are more isolated or are led by missing or evil leaders, which would make them more vulnerable or more willing to accept the possibility that sacrificing to Auril the Frostmaiden will help the situation. So I would suggest that you move the human sacrifices from Bryn Shander and Easthaven to Goodmead and Dugan's Hole, while keeping it in Targos, and then have it explained by the Frost Druids going around to the various towns, encouraging the people to make these sacrifices. Once again, we'll go into more detail with that in a later video. One of the things you'll also want to be aware of is what you need to foreshadow as you begin the adventure. This is very important because doing foreshadowing, minor hints or a little reference here, will pay dividends as it comes into fruition later in the adventure, making your players go, okay, so that's why we encountered these Duergar here, or oh, I thought I heard about these Netherese cities before. So you want to do as much foreshadowing as you can possibly do during chapter 1 and 2, and that of course means that you will need to know what comes in the later chapters so you can foreshadow it. I'll try to briefly go over some of the things that I think it is most important to keep in mind when you plan out what foreshadowing you're going to do, and then we'll go into more detail with how and where exactly to foreshadow certain things as we cover chapter 1 and 2 in particular in later videos in this series. So first off, as we've gone over a few times now, there are 3 primary stories and factions in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. There's Auril and her Frost Druids, there's Xardorok and his Duergar and his dragon, and then there's the Arcane Brotherhood, these 4 wizards looking for the ancient Netherese necropolis of Ithrin. These are also the 3 most important things to foreshadow in chapter 1 and 2. There are of course references to these 3 stories and these 3 factions in chapter 1 and 2, so some of the work has been done for you. It is however possible to go through chapters 1 and 2 without ever encountering representatives of these 3 storylines. So what I suggest you do is that you keep in mind that you will want the characters to meet, or at least hear about, Frost Druids, Duergar and Wizard from the Arcane Brotherhood. You can do this by steering them towards the towns that have these representatives in them, or you can make sure that the representatives comes to them, such as having Duergar trying to steal from the characters, or having a Frost Druid ambush the characters, or having a wizard such as Velyn showing up to demand something from the characters or ask them to do her a favor. This will also make the chance meeting with Velyn later in the adventure a lot less jarring. Lastly, you'll also perhaps want to foreshadow the city of Ithrin itself. This could be by having wizards from the Arcane Brotherhood speak about Ithrin early, or you can have a sage or a knowledgeable type in Icewind Dale relay rumors about this ancient city that is supposedly hidden somewhere underneath Icewind Dale. Creating some mystery around Ithrin and this Netherese city from an old forgotten empire that is filled with magical wonders will make it more of an aha moment when the characters then hear about Ithrin and the possibility that it can be used to end Auril's everlasting rime from Velyn at the end of chapter 4. So foreshadowing Ithrin can really pay off later in the adventure. Obviously, there's also a lot of other things you could foreshadow if you're using various locations from chapter 2. Some of them really benefits from already being foreshadowed a few sessions earlier in chapter 1. But going over each of these isn't really feasible here, but as we cover chapter 1 and 2 in following videos, I'll go into more details with how you can foreshadow certain things and where you can foreshadow it, and also speak a little about how you can steer the characters towards towns or places that have foreshadowing and how you can enhance this foreshadowing. Alright, so that about wraps up this video. If you want the written details on some of the stuff we've gone over here, you can check out links in the description below, as well as a link to our DM's resources for DMs running Rime of the Frostmaiden. In the next video, I'll continue looking into how you can prepare for running the campaign, including how you help your players create characters that work well with the campaign. In the meanwhile, I'd like to thank our patrons who support us and make it possible for us to create these videos, and I'll wish you all a great game in Icewind Dale, and I hope I see you in the next video.